What's the craziest way you found out you had a boyfriend? Before the story begins, subscribe to TaleHub, because some reveals are better heard than guessed. Now listen, the craziest way anyone found out they had a boyfriend started with a basketball to the face and ended with an anniversary that had never been discussed. There are moments in life that arrive so absurd they could be plotted by a mischievous novelist, and yet they are unbearably true. The moment she first noticed anything strange about Trey arrived wrapped in the kind of raw, ridiculous accident that makes memory feel like a film. Freshman year, a stray shot from a friend's clumsy hand became a comet aiming not for the hoop, but for her face, and the story began with a nose that swelled and a bruise that bloomed like a small vindictive planet. It began with pain and apologies and stitches, and it began with laughter that softened into the kind of friendship that claims entire afternoons. The friendship settled into place like a habit. They became the pair that drifted through campus like two halves of an inside joke. They shared takeout rituals on Friday nights, turned study breaks into anime marathons, synchronized their schedules until their days overlapped like well-placed gears. From the outside, it looked seamless and tidy. From the inside, it felt inevitable and comfortable. She would later describe it as the kind of closeness that makes the future less scary, an anchor against the sudden coldness of adulthood. They were the sort of friends who lent scarves, brought soup when one fell ill, and sat together at 2 a.m. while the rest of the dorm slept. People began to notice. The notices were small at first. A barista handing them a single receipt for both coffees. Classmates assuming they should partner up because it made administrative sense. Teammates calling each other jokes as if they were already married. These things could have been shrugged off as the social shorthand of college, where familiarity is often corrected into labels without consent. But the labels accumulated like leaves in a gutter after a storm. They became expectations. Where one person saw friendship, the rest of the world incrementally read romance. She never corrected that reading. She never minded the way people assumed. The gestures she shared with Trey were not those of a couple in stage-lit declarations. They were ordinary tendernesses, warm hands on cold nights, shared blankets, the habit of picking up someone's favorite comfort food when they were under the weather. He picked her up after late labs. She sent him playlists. He remembered how she liked her tea. These were not the gestures of public romance. They were the gestures of caretaking, the human currency of companionship. Junior year brought small accelerations. Trey's mother began calling him more, and unexpectedly, calling her too. Not a quick hello, but long questions that explored the narrator's plans and deeper ambitions, the sort of maternal curiosity that hovered just beyond the personal. The coach of the basketball team, an extraneous authority who rarely bothered with the social lives of teammates, started calling her to ask where Trey was when the schedule went off. She discovered, to her muted surprise, that she had been listed as Trey's emergency contact, a bureaucratic detail with the intimacy of trust woven into it. When flu felled her one November, Trey transformed into a caretaker in full force. He missed classes and study sessions. He camped outside her door with soup and thermometers, and he brought streaming logins and blankets as if he had been appointed guardian by invisible decree. The contour of his behavior began to tilt the world's assumptions into the form of a relationship, even though their private hours never crossed the line she imagined as dating. She moved through those days with a blush of denial. It felt easier to keep the label off the table, to insulate the fragile architecture of their friendship against a term that would restructure everything. There were pockets where she allowed herself to be honest about how treacherous the ignorance was. There were other pockets where she pretended the world's misreading didn't bend her own heart. Her inner voice was a stubborn blonde who refused to make leaps into conclusions, who preferred to live in the gentle groove of routine rather than the rawness of naming. But small things were accumulating, nicknames in casual use, affectionate introductions at events that carried the weight of assumption, the way his teammates joked about them, as if their narrative were an established fact. Then, like a comet arriving on cue, the moment of revelation came wrapped in an ordinary night and a catastrophic pair of choices. The evening started like every other Friday, takeout scattered across the coffee table, anime flickering, the comforting ritual of socks and shared blankets. The narrator remembers the instant before she noticed anything unusual, the tilt of Trey's head, the way he paused a scene to watch her instead of the screen, the small gravity that shifted in the room. He turned and used a term of endearment she had always heard before, but never imagined would be directed in the way it was. He asked about dinner for an anniversary she never knew they had, and then, with the casualness of someone announcing weather, he kissed her in a way that rearranged the furniture of her assumptions. It was not a peck. It was not a flirtatious experiment. It was a kiss that spoke of months of unsaid things, of a calendar mapped in invisible hearts. After he left to answer a call from his mother, a call that continued the surreal pattern of her interrogations about life plans and preferences, she slipped into detective mode. Digital evidence, if one chooses to look, often functions like a confession. She scrolled through months of messages and discovered a subtle architecture of affection concealed in the seemingly harmless exchange of emojis and quick notes. Hearts that had always seemed friendly took on angles and shadows. Phrases used casually between friends suddenly read like markers in a private language. When she shared the shock with a close friend, the friend's laugh was not mocking but incredulous, the sound one makes when encountering someone's startling gap in perception. According to the friend, the rumor mill had never been a rumor. She had been publicly assumed to be Trey's girlfriend since last March. Trey had told everyone they were a couple, in the hushed certainty of someone who had already placed the ring of familiarity around a day on the calendar. She had not noticed, because she had never been told what to name the quiet rituals they performed, because she had never been dragged into the formalities of courtship, and because names sometimes arrive so softly that they pass by without the necessary shock that wakes a person from oblivion. When he returned, and the room stilled into accusation and confusion, the man who had pressed soup into her hands and checked her temperature every few hours transformed into someone whose voice could be measured in unfamiliar decibels. He paced, assembled grievances, and measured months like inventory. He accused her of leading him on and of emotional misuse. He recounted his own investment like a ledger of favors and late-night caretaking, as if performative acts of devotion automatically conferred ownership. In the same breath that he claimed devotion, he demanded acknowledgement, an admission that she had failed to recognize the relationship he had already declared. The comfortable friend she had always known recited grievances as if tallying a score. The narrator found herself betrayed in two directions, by the news that a shared intimacy had been labeled without her consent, and by the startling metamorphosis of the boy she had trusted. In one breath, she had been casually loved. In the next breath, she was accused of theft and neglect. The sensation was dizzying and entire. To have a relationship defined for you without participation in the designation is to feel the world shift under your feet with no invitation. She realized in a single dramatic hour that she had been dating someone without a conversation, loved by a community, introduced by family, and labeled across a campus, while she had continued to inhabit a safer zone, friendship. And so the discovery and the break happened on the same day. She had found out she had a boyfriend, and then, in the heat of hurt and misunderstanding, and shouted accusations, she had ended their relationship. It was a paradox, an unconsented engagement followed by a self-authorized termination. It felt like the most toxic romantic ledger, a cruel bookend to a story that had been written without her ink. In the immediate aftermath, everything tasted like metal. There were friends to call, messages to answer, a sudden deficiency of the small rituals that had kept the daily clock moving. The campus kept performing its rituals. Classes continued, food warmed in microwaves, people smiled. But for her, the ordinary rhythm had collapsed into an anxious tempo of questions and broken expectations. She was left to process an entire year of gestures suddenly reinterpreted, to scan memory for evidence of meaning she had missed, and to understand how a relationship can be declared and dismantled like a billboard announced and then taken down. The truth about Trey remained incomplete. The boy who had slammed a basketball into her nose and then sat with a bowl of soup at the foot of her bed was not a single story. He was a knot of contradiction: tender caretaker, campus flirt, teammate, son, man with a mother who called her weakly, a person who could simultaneously be devoted and entitled. The narrator suspected there were missing threads, truths that explained why he had named them to the world without naming them to her, reasons that might involve fear, insecurity, a desire to protect, or a tangled logic only he possessed. The rest of their chronicle required time and gentle interrogations that had not yet been had. For now, she held her own breath in a small chest, measured the quickness of her pulse, and imagined the quiet lives that unfold when two people don't speak the same language about each other. Her world was the shape of that evening, absurd, abrupt, and electric. It had begun with an ache to the nose and culminated in the discovery of a relationship she had never consented to, and in the immediacy of grief she had ended it. College had taught her many things. This, she vowed, would teach her the necessity of speaking the names that matter aloud before they are spoken for you. After Trey left that night, the room felt too large for her body. It was the absence of him, not in the romanticized sense of losing a lover, but in the sharp realization that the trusted silhouette she had leaned into for so long was a stranger wearing familiar mannerisms. She moved around her apartment as if her possessions were no longer hers, as if her routines had decayed into replicas made of cardboard. The leftover pad thai in the fridge, the blanket he used during movie nights, even the dent in the couch cushion where he always sat, they now felt like stage props from a version of her life she no longer recognized. She tried to rationalize his reaction. The betrayal she felt wasn't just about the secret relationship he'd declared without her knowledge. It was also about the way he'd exploded. Something had broken open in him, something raw and hidden, something not entirely about her. His outrage had been too large, too fast, too rehearsed, as if he'd been storing panic like a second heartbeat. It wasn't until the next morning, when exhaustion gave way to clarity, that she allowed herself to ask the question she had avoided. Why would someone pretend to be in a relationship with a person who hadn't agreed to it? There had to be an origin to this delusion. Trey was many things: popular, flirtatious, lazy with academics, radiant on a basketball court, but he had never been manipulative or vicious before. His temper the night before felt like a mask ripped open, revealing a wound beneath. She remembered his mother's strange questions, the coach calling her instead of him, the teammates assuming they were together without batting an eye, the fact that he had used her name as his emergency contact. These were not spontaneous moments. They suggested a narrative he had told repeatedly, reinforced, and lived inside. The lie had roots. She needed to know where those roots were planted. The story did not reveal itself all at once. It arrived in fragments, overheard conversations at study halls, accidental gossip whispered in cafeterias, murmurs between teammates after games. Trey had not always been the confident, flirty, adored college golden boy people now saw. In high school, he had been the quiet kid people overlooked, the boy who sat alone at lunch and grew inches over summer breaks without anyone noticing. His first attempt at dating ended in public humiliation. His crush, a girl he had liked for over a year, had laughed at him in front of half the school. She had told people he wasn't boyfriend material, that he was awkward, clingy, easy to push around. It shattered him. That humiliation dragged itself across his early college days like a lingering shadow. And then, somewhere during freshman year, perhaps that day, he apologized for the basketball accident and found himself laughing with her. He discovered how good it felt to be seen not as a joke, but as someone valued. She had not known he stayed awake to write thank you messages after every study session, or that he practiced introductions in his mirror to make sure he didn't sound nervous when he brought her to social events. She had not known she was his anchor, not just his comfort. So he started building a life where she was the missing piece, the girlfriend he had never been brave enough to ask for, but claimed in every other way. He told his mother about their relationship because it felt like saying it would make it real. He told his coach because love sounded like something solid, something to be proud of, something safer than vulnerability. He became like a person rehearsing lines from a play never confirmed. He didn't ask her to join the performance, but he memorized his parts anyway. For him, the fantasy wasn't malicious. It was survival. And she, completely unaware, had played her part perfectly. Kind, present, nurturing, perhaps too soft with her boundaries, too trusting in the comfort of friendship. They had been a picture of intimacy without clarity. Her silence had been permissive. His silence had been possessive. And neither of them had spoken the truth, not once, until the night everything cracked. But even knowing this, even piecing together that his love had been twisted by insecurity and the terror of being unlovable, she couldn't forgive him. Because the truth that mattered wasn't what he intended. It was what he did. He built a world around her and never invited her into it. And when she tried to apologize for not knowing, he attacked her for her innocence. In the second week after the break, Trey disappeared for a while. He skipped games, stopped responding to group chats, and avoided events where he knew she'd be. Teammates whispered that he'd been benched during practice for losing his temper. Others said he'd been calling his mother in tears. She almost felt sorry for him, the tragedy of someone drowning in his own unspoken needs, but she reminded herself that empathy doesn't revoke accountability. Even so, something still lingered. There were days where she missed the way he laughed during anime scenes that weren't funny, or how he would heat up tea without being asked when she was quiet for too long. Grief for friendships is the strangest grief, confusing, lonely, and difficult to explain to anyone else. She wasn't grieving a lover. She was grieving the safest person she thought she had. Her phone buzzed one evening in early spring. It was a text from his mother, one that broke her breath. It didn't blame her. It didn't ask for gossip. It simply said, "Thank you for being the best thing in his life when he didn't know he needed one. I'm sorry it ended this way. I hope someday you understand all the love he didn't know how to give." She stared at the message for a long time, her stomach twisting in a way that felt like a quiet heartbreak. Trey's flaw was never that he didn't care. It was that he cared so much he built a world instead of speaking in it. And in that silence, he had trapped both of them. That night, she made peace with the truth. They would never be friends again. Not the way they were. There was too much fiction in what had been real. Too many words swallowed instead of spoken. And part of her, the wiser, older part, finally admitted that love, for all its beauty, can also be territorial. It can begin with care and end with control. It can feel like attention and turn into ownership. It can be sincere and still destructive. She would never again let someone write her role for her, not even if the story felt comfortable. There would be no next time like this. She had learned the value of stopping a story before someone else decided how it ends. Spring arrived with a perfume of fresh beginnings, and she found herself walking the campus paths she used to share with Trey. Some corners of the university still held his ghost: the bench near the psychology building where they used to wait for each other after class, the patch of grass under the oak tree where he fell asleep face down after an all-nighter, her laughter echoing as she shook his shoulder awake. But these memories no longer hurt. They no longer felt like the residue of betrayal. They were stories now, ones she could look at without flinching. People still asked what happened. The barista at the coffee shop raised an eyebrow when she ordered alone. The teammates who used to tease her nodded along with that knowing look, the one that says, "We noticed, but we won't pry." She just smiled vaguely. Those who pushed for an explanation got the same answer every time. Sometimes a person can give you everything except the truth, and that's what costs the most. She never heard from Trey again. She didn't know if he transferred, or quit basketball, or threw himself into therapy or denial. Somewhere she hoped he found what he was looking for. Not her, but the version of himself that didn't need ownership to feel loved. Maybe he'd find someone he could talk to instead of assume about. Someone who could help him build a relationship in the sunlight instead of the shadows of imagination. And as for her, she learned to listen to the spaces in relationships, not just the words. To ask questions before assumptions grew claws. To love without offering completion to those who still hadn't learned to stand on their own. Years later, she would look back on that moment. The accidental boyfriend, the fictional anniversary, the breakdown of a friendship that never had a chance to be honest. And she would feel nothing but gratitude. Not for the mistake, but for the clarity it gave her. It had taught her the most important lesson an adult could learn. Love is not real until both sides agree to live in the same reality. Too many hearts break in silence, in imagination, in one-sided devotion disguised as fate. The strongest bonds are not those that feel effortless, but those where effort is shared, consent is mutual, and words are spoken out loud, not implied. She survived the most toxic relationship of her life without ever knowing it existed, until the day it ended. And in that strange, absurd twist of fate, she wound up not heartbroken, but awakened, self-aware, and free. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to TaleHub for more stories like this. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Your support means everything. Thank you for being here.